Explain like I'm 5. Why do we fly across the globe latitudinally horizontally instead of longitudinally? For example, if I were in Tangier, Morocco, and wanted to fly to Whangarei, New Zealand, the antipode on the globe, wouldn't it be about the same time to go up instead of across? At all stages of flight, planes must be less than X hours from an airport in case of emergencies. The number of hours depends on the plane. When crossing the Pacific, there are airports just for this in Alaska and Hawaii. And on the Atlantic side you have Iceland on the middle helping out. Over the poles you have long stretches without any airports. So this is avoided. But we don't look up the Great Circle route. Planes flying the shortest distance don't usually fly horizontally because the Earth is a sphere. On a map it looks like an arc that bends towards one of the poles. The Earth is widest at the equator. The real question should be, why doesn't a plane take off, hover, and let the Earth's rotation do the work? Why the hell would you fly to Whangarei, bro? There is a safety reason. There are a lot less airport where a plane could divert to in case of problems. Because the poles are literally deserts. No airports. Engine fails. You land in water or the actual desert that is Antarctica, and the closest ship will take half a day to come rescue you. That's not the case when crossing the Pacific, Indian and Atlantic Oceans. Also wondering why you picked Tangier specifically, lol. I believe that NY to Europe flights do fly in an upward arc rather than a straight line. Because the diameter of the Earth at that latitude is narrower than at the latitude of a straight line. The premier airline of the 50s and 60s, Pan American, got its start flying north-south routes between the U.S. East Coast and South America. Yes, but you can't get there with one flight. You need to connect somewhere. Someplace with many other people at a big airport. 90 of all people live in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm no travel agent. But for your example I would recommend you connect through Dubai and likely Australia. You could try connecting through South Africa. There are absolutely routes that are more vertical than horizontal, such as NY Miami or NY Beijing. One reason they try and fly lower latitudes is that you start running into polar vortexes. This unstable air leads to turbulence and is harder to plan times, fuel loads, etc. The other reason is that most big cities are in temperate and tropical zones rather than subarctic. So planning routes follows population. They do. It's just not beneficial for most flights time savings wise. Also, if you're traveling vertically you're probably causing Russian airspace, which PPL might try to avoid these days. But a few years ago I took a flight from India to Canada and it went very close to the North Pole. Generally, flights are based on economic value. I don't imagine that there is enough demand for a regular direct flight between those two destinations. So there is most likely going to be connections, which means heading to the bigger airports. If demand was there and going over the poles was the most direct way, we could fly over the poles. But it's clearly more profitable to route you along existing flights. Actually, we typically fly by the shortest distance, which may be a great circle whose diameter plane cuts through the center of the Earth. It may go over one of the poles. Flying a great circle, shortest route to reach another point on the surface of a globe, is done whenever possible. Saves on time and fuel. Get a globe and a string. Put the ends of the string on any two cities. That will be the basic route an airplane will take. Some deviations for ATC corridors or jet stream boosts, but that is basically it. And they do fly longitudinally. The straightest line between 2 points on a globe is a curve. And that curve goes very polar on long flights. There exist plenty of north-south routings, e.g. from Europe to places in Africa. Similarly, there are lots of connections between Asia and Australia as well as between NA and SA. They simply aren't as frequent as the much more popular routings across the Atlantic and Pacific in east-west direction. The main reason for this is population density. There simply aren't as many people living in the southern hemisphere 13 as is in the north 87. And that results in less popular north-south routing pairs. Planes do this though. Find yourself a beach ball Earth and a piece of string route and you will discover what we call a great circle route. Most plane routes do follow this, but with some variations for wind and other factors. Two-engined aircraft, which is the most common today, also have to be within a certain distance from an adequate airport, meaning some regions are out of bounds for them. But again, the premise is that planes do exactly what you suggest, it just looks differently on a flat map. Because the Earth is not flat. So did you forget about flights from the USA to South America? Europe to Africa? Asia to Australia? Those are longitudinal flights. They do when it makes sense to do so. There is quite a bit of traffic over the North Pole, or at least close to it. China to the NY Chicago and likewise Middle East to US West Coast. The Southern Hemisphere is less populated, so less demand for direct flights, but there are some flights that get close to Antarctica. Sydney to Santiago, for example. They do. For example, New York to Hong Kong. Shortest route is over the North Pole. Around 8,000 miles. The Cathay Pacific non-stop routes take this alternative horizontal route that went from like New York to Alaska to Japan to Hong Kong, so you remained near populated areas, would be about 9,000 miles. So more fuel, longer travel time. Different routes, priorities, different things because of winds, safety, international airspace, fuel, flight time, etc. I live in Michigan and was really confused one time when I saw a Muslim praying in the direction of Mecca and he was facing northeast. Took me a while to figure out why that was a correct direction. I often take halfway around the world trips, and this was explained to me as following the jet stream saves fuel. I had wondered that since they put in the follow-along maps for the passengers, there's not much assistance in the up and over to the fuel savings. From IAD to Japan you fly across most of the contiguous states, a big chunk of Canada, Alaska and out along the Aleutian archipelago. Then skirt the coastline of Russia. So, your assumption is off.